Good morning. Good morning. Tuesday morning. Cup of coffee chat with Mary May. Um, see, I'm running into the room, had some technical difficulties, but I'm here to share the morning nuggets that we have planned for this morning. So, good morning. Um, I am Mary May, and before you make any decision on a Tuesday morning, I say have a cup of coffee or tea, and sometimes, depending on who's in the room, a smoothie before you make any decisions. So I'm looking forward to our chat this morning as I infuse and input. Um, Using the GPS program that I have created to help leaders, individuals level up in their career and kind of pull the curtain back for what it is that they are seeking to do. So, I am Mary May, and I am a leadership strategist that I infuse both my work in corporate America, building teams, helping individuals pull that curtain back and identify ways that some level of maybe mental health or emotional wellness has impacted them, but so that they don't stay stuck and continue to be overlooked and underpaid, to promote it and in a position that they desire to be in. So, jumping right into it. And I have to say, before I get started, this is probably one of my biggest, good morning. This is probably one of my biggest components of the program that I coach around, that I provide strategies around. And so I am probably it's probably going to be a benefit for me to do this over a couple of conversations. So I welcome, as always, engagement for this conversation and all conversations, but this is probably like some of the nuts and bolts, talking about work stress, talking about work trauma, understanding what it is and how it shows up for us in our day to day, but then also how it impacts us outside of work. So, when you think about workplace trauma and you think about the impact, it has an impact on your interpersonal growth. So, when you think about interpersonal growth, you have to think about all of the aspects of life that are important to you, all of the aspects of life that if the room is shaken, then you're shaken. And what is it that happens to not only your mind, your body, and your performance, but like just your thinking process and your mindset of how you tuck information. So if anything pops out and you have questions, engagement is always welcome. You can throw those in the chat wherever it is that you are joining me from. And we're gonna jump right on into it. But before like I get into the workplace trauma, I know that the word trauma is a word that is kind of thrown around these days, especially with what we have encountered over these past couple years in our life. However, trauma has existed for a long time. So I want to put the framework in regards to trauma in the context of this conversations or conversations that I have when it comes to leveling up your career and leveling up how it is that you succeed in life overall. And so there's three different types of trauma. There is acute trauma, there is chronic, and then there's complex. So acute trauma would be like a single incident, a single fire or a horrible breakup in a relationship. Um, Let me see what else. Possibly a car accident, different things like that. Chronic is something that's like repeated and prolonged. So it has the chronic like nature where it just constantly nagging you. It could be in a level of an abusive type situation. And workplace abuse does occur. And sometimes we dismiss it because we're like, no, that didn't really happen here in the workplace. But it's also possibly because things are occurring in other aspects of our lives that resemble it. So it just looks like it's just more of the same stuff. And then the last is the complex, where it's exposure to multiple events, multiple things that are happening to you that are indirect and interpersonal in nature over a course of like several different places in which you have influence, where you succeed the most. So we're going to dive into workplace trauma and the impact of the interpersonal, and first look at what is workplace trauma. So when you hear workplace trauma, what are some of the things that comes to your mind? What are some of the first thoughts that you think in the workplace that comes to the forefront of your thought process and the things that you do? Is it like a toxic workplace? Is it performance reviews not really, matching up or looking the way that you want them to look? Have you experienced a performance review that you didn't agree with? And then when you state that you don't agree with it, that it becomes a very antagonistic situation, that you may decide to leave that work situation and go somewhere else. But as soon as something triggers your mind that it looks like the previous workplace, then you go back into the same cycle, same thought process, and end up re-injuring your emotional capacity that impacts your performance capacity to stuff that may have existed in a new situation, but now it's covering all from an old situation. Um, Showing evidence or perception that is out of alignment with the facts about your performance, like things that question your thinking. You're at home rethinking it, you're talking to your friends, rehashing your strategy, your perspective, how it is that you did stuff. You're questioning your capacity. If there's any interaction interpersonal in the workplace that has you questioning your strategy, the way that you implemented something, the fact that you thought that you had done something on a most optimal level, then it becomes exactly, Dr. Reggie, an hostile work situation. And hostile, yes, because of the interpretation that someone has worked with you, but then definitely how you internalize and interpret that information outside of the workplace. So when you think about positioning yourself, are you positioning yourself manifesting more trauma for you on a day-to-day basis, such that you can't separate from the workplace to, when you're at home and in your social setting, that it totally consumes you? We're going to talk about some of that, some of that today. So, like, when you think about workplace trauma, it's a response that can interfere with your normal functioning. So it may create like your reaction, your productivity. You may feel more fatigue. You may be experiencing like upset stomach, um, restlessness where you're not getting a full night's rest. Your performance and productivity on what you did before to strive to get that raise, to get that level up position, it doesn't exist, for you in that capacity anymore. And well, not so much anymore, but there's a fracture that has been interrupted. And we talked about pattern interruptions a couple weeks ago. So it's the pattern of you being a successful candidate has been interrupted and impacted by this interactional relationship or conversation that you've had with someone. And then now, because you've taken that on as it being valid and true, that everything that you've known about yourself is almost like kind of thrown out the window. And the thing is that the causes for some of the emotional trauma can be immediately direct or traced to workplace violence, toxic work spaces, sexual harassment. And sexual harassment doesn't mean, it can mean verbal, it can mean gestures, it can mean statements, it can mean how things are assigned to you in the workplace. Racism, discrimination, toxic workplaces, culture. And so, like, when the culture of the space that you work in is antagonistic, and so you're always feeling like you're on defense and having to prove who you are and why it is that you're doing something, then that definitely could be workplace trauma. You can be like, but I love the work and I love the people I do, but it's the management team. Or the management team understands me and is ready to level me up, but I don't have the support of who is in alignment with me. So it's like it's always some measure or something that kind of impacts you. And then when we have a natural disaster like in the world, the reaction to those things. And when I say natural disaster, it could be stuff that we endured and encountered in 2020 in the media, in our personal neighborhoods, in our homes, how we were impacted by different things usually carries into the workplace. And sometimes individuals in the workplace don't have that same scope of reference. So then, therefore, how they speak about it, understand it, attempt to support you can create a one down situation or a traumatic reaction to a certain, place of reference. So when you think about how it is that you want to excel in the workplace, overcoming and understanding how you can pull the curtain back, how you can not be a hidden figure in that workspace and still survive, requires you to take a interaction and an investment in yourself to understand what is it that I can control, what is it that I can do differently? And how can I not personalize every conversation, everything that is happening around me? And as you are striving for CEO status or whatever that executive level is for you, you have to put some things at activation in practice, like activation of how it is that you do self-care, how it is that you acknowledge what is in fact impacting you, and confront it kind of head on. Now, usually when we say confront something, we think we have to confront with some aggression or some fight or something that is going to be like totally the opposite of who our nature is. And that's not necessarily the case. When we confront, we are ensuring that how we position ourselves, how we implement our perspective is utilizing the strengths that we have. Because once you personalize it, you end up taking it on and it ends up taking a whole nother personality perspective of how it is that you see your work, how you experience your work, how people around you experience you. So if something is happening with you in life, is nothing necessarily, well, I can't say nothing, but I want to say nothing is necessarily wrong with you per se, but your life experiences, your lived experiences have been impacted by, if it was an acute traumatic experience, remember that's a single incident. We don't get a roadmap or a script on how to deal with the matrix of life when it does something wrong or it does something that partially harms us or someone that we care for. So when it happens, we are interrupted as far as in our daily functioning. That can look like, what we were sharing a little bit earlier in regards to what that work trauma response is something that's interfering with your natural functioning. So if it's something interfering with your natural functioning, then you got to realize that you can't personalize it, but you have to strategize. You have to figure out a pathway, utilizing that GPS by setting the goals, setting the plan and positioning yourself, and a strategy to cave your way out of something that's not serving you well. And so when you have workplace induced trauma, it's a real experience. And it's a real experience that culturally, melanated individuals are told to hang in there. We're told that, okay, well, the reason you're being identified is X, or the reason that this is happening to you is Y, be it gender, be it ethnicity, be it other preferences that you have in your life that people don't understand. It's a real reaction. It's a real challenge. However, you have to be able to kind of work through that daily divorce of self, which is that conversation that you have in the morning preparing yourself. It's that conversation you have at the end of the day when you are rethinking, overthinking, challenging your strategy, thinking your perspective has been presented in an inappropriate way, it may not necessarily be in an inappropriate way. It may just need to be reframed so that you can package it in a digestible way for someone else to be able to respond and receive it in a different way. And so when you do that, you have a positive perspective that begins to reshape that daily divorce of self that makes you feel less than and have you overthinking it, that you're not going to be a hidden figure in that office space, because you're going to recognize that this injury that has happened to your career is, not forever. It's not a forever situation. So let's look at how, when you define, Forbes magazine defines career trauma is an injury that occurs when an individual experiences a traumatic event in the workplace, such as harassment, bullying, or being passed over for a promotion. So in 2021, Forbes has this in an article where we're talking about what workplace trauma really looks like. And injury, the word injury is kind of arbitrary. So not necessarily a physical injury where you had to go to the emergency room, but emotional injury, performance injury, your anxiety, level, or how it is that you manage stuff, like, has been injured, has been impacted, has been told that it was deficient on some particular level. So because of the deficiency that has been identified, you now carry that and haven't done anything with it, but you pack it up and take it everywhere that you go. So that injury begins to close up the wound under certain circumstances. And then you say, okay, well, I'm okay. I'm gonna shake it off. I'm, whatever. Or they may have provided a trinket that, is like hush money in a sense. And you're like, okay, well, I'm okay because I got this raise. But you have to be more mindful about not only how the injury is impacting your performance, but how it's impacting your mind, how it's impacting your heart, and how it's impacting your body and your health overall. So a comment that we have is, sometimes you might even been told you are overreacting. Definitely. The biggest thing is having a colleague or someone who, let's just put it on the screen, a colleague or someone who can be objective to hear your story and provide their assessment to the situation. Sometimes we may even downplay what is really happening. So you have said a whole mouthful, Dr. Reggie. So, like, yes, we downplay what's really happening because we don't believe that is really happening. And we want to kind of fix what has happened, or like try to change it. But if you take personal inventory and honest inventory around what your experiences are, then you can understand that this injury is real. That you being passed over for a promotion, or overlooked, or hidden, or the fact that you have been impacted with an injury in the workplace, in your interpersonal reality, your interpersonal relationship, or how you communicate, then you have to be mindful of what and how it shows up for you, and what and how you can not be reactive, but that might be when you have to take a step back and reset the table so that you can present it where your emotions are in alignment with what your intention of the conversation is. A lot of times we are misread because we don't take that moment to reset the conversation, to reset our intentionality, to reset how we feel. And how you feel is extremely important, because how you feel manifests into your productivity. And if your productivity is off, then pretty much everything is off, because you're no longer focusing on the outcome of the project that you in history would have excelled without an issue. You're now focusing on what you have internalized and personalized in that situation that is not serving you well. And so what usually comes to the place is workplace PTSD. PTSD, I said that right. The challenge that, from a clinical behavioral health standpoint, is we say post trauma syndrome. But it can't be post if you haven't healed. It can't be post if you haven't identified what are the themes, what are the characteristics that tend to impact and influence your ability to kind of move forward. And then sometimes, most of the times, it is not in a post standpoint because it may be showing up in other packages. So other packages could be you're highly irritable, you are hyper and reactive to a lot of stuff. You find that you are very exhausted. You may have some symptoms of depression and you question, am I depressed? Am I, like what's going on? How is this manifesting in my life in this way? You're emotionally numb. You are having difficulty sleeping throughout the night. When you are in the intention space and working on the project, you have a lack of focus, or you could be very impulsive. You may have a negative outlook on more things that you had in before the incident or before the injury. Avoidance of doing work. We say we procrastinate or that we're multitasking, but if you're avoiding doing the work that you enjoy or that is going to move you to positioning yourself for getting that promotion, getting well paid, and not being a hidden figure, then you have to kind of recognize these behaviors, because behavior communicates how you feel. Behavior communicates what it is that's going on with you, and your body has stress points. And the stress is usually the trigger, the post-it note to be like, hey, look at me. Like, it's something happening over here and I need you to do something. But we usually tuck it and don't do anything. And we tend to either blame ourselves, we have intrusive thoughts, or we blame other people. And yes, definitely want to acknowledge it can't be post if you're still living in it. And so, definitely, post can only exist if you have gone through some form of wellness, some form of doing something that's going to help you move the needle forward and helping you recognize what it usually looks like. So that list of things that I just gave out as far as what workplace PTSD looks like is the things that we don't pay attention to, are the things that generally cause us to either just kind of shut down, break down, and not be productive any longer, or kind of disconnect from the workplace overall. And if it doesn't come with something, kind of more dramatic, then we're like, okay, no, I can get over this. But that's the manifestation of it never being post. So it can't be post unless you have actually had intentions on how you seek support, and whatever that support may look like, it may look different for you. But usually recognizable or repetitive trauma that we would think about in workplace, we categorize in three different ways. We usually categorize it as far as somebody having a layoff or like a job loss, psychological harassment, or racial discrimination. Like, if they typically, these are the ones that we react to understand, okay, yeah, I must be having a traumatic moment because I didn't know that I was walking in that conference room and they were going to let me go. Or I didn't know that my performance review was going to say this, that, and the other. Or the ripple effect of if there's a job loss. But you have experienced those other symptoms that I listed out over time and ignored those. So then this becomes the recognizable patterns that come out. So it's like you should be more mindful when you think about how intentional you are with your wellness around life, is that you have to be intentional on how you choose to heal. And the traumatic events can really paralyze you and place handcuffs on your ability to see yourself leading forward, to see yourself being promoted and not personalizing the traumatic injury that you've experienced and carrying it with you from one address to the next, from one team, one project to the next. If you are challenged with really sitting with yourself and saying, okay, how can I grow forward? How can I lead forward? You have to begin to understand and recognize that you become your worst enemy in the sense of how it is that you can grow forward, how you can lead forward. Why are you being overlooked and underpaid? Because those manifestations of the trauma and you not shifting it into wellness so that your productivity can sustain, usually is what pauses you, usually is what handcuffs you, usually is what keeps you where you're not pulling the curtain back to see something in a different way. And so the indirect manifestation of workplace trauma can really, really, have an impact on you. So I have this quote, as I tend to have quotes each week, where it says, don't let your own memory become your worst enemy. The longer you live in the past, the less future you have to enjoy. Don't let your own memory become your worst enemy. The longer you live in the past, the less future you have to enjoy. So, when we talk about, are you rethinking? Are you overthinking? Are you questioning your ability? Are you changing the positioning that you have to strategize and moving forward? Are you in um are you in a situation where you're doing tasks that's like busy work to kind of validate and prove that you are more than capable of what it is that you are seeking to do? You have to really, really be mindful. So when you think about the steps to wellness after a traumatic event, the way to be responsible in those situations is, one, to recognize and take the time that you need to recover. Take the time to do that honest inventory so that you can not only be intentional, you can be practical, but you can recognize what your body has communicated to you already. And so then two, you would identify what your needs are. Your needs cannot be told to you. Your need in the healing process to get to a post-traumatic work stress situation cannot be told and dictated to you. They can be suggested. However, you have to identify what is your survival plan. What do you need to overcome? What thought processes do you need to grow through so that you can define how it is best for you to recover? Some people, that's a vacation. Some people, it's exercise. Some people, it is actually having a sounding board, a coach, a therapist, a strategist, someone that you can go, and the third step being seeking support so that you can help remap what your goals are when these situations occur, so that the injury and the dance that you have constantly done in a variety of different situations doesn't become the dance or the pattern that keeps you limited. And as long as you choose to not address them and not have your recovery plan in place, then you will continue to feel as if you're being overlooked and underpaid. And you will tend to thrive in an unhealthy manner in a place where the employees are stressed, the communication is like really, really limited, and you have a blame culture that you are immersing yourself into because of possible other reasons that keep you connected to that position. But that would be a traumatic workplace. That would be an indirect manifestation of how workplace trauma tends to live in your space. So the wellness steps would be identifying your honest inventory for yourself. Am I stressed? Am I experiencing high level of lack of focus, irritability, lack of sleep, avoiding work, having intrusive thoughts? Is it impacting other areas of my life? If it is, then the honest inventory is to say, okay, how do I need help and how can I pull this curtain back so that I can stop repeating this pattern over and over again? Because the blame culture may be where you have to look at things in a different capacity, but then also think about how when the harassment culture is live and on point, they have you doing stuff that's overlapping or unnecessary, where you're doing tasks where you're very intellectual, you know your skill set, you know your strategy, and you know your strength. but you've allowed this energy of this blame culture and this toxic workspace to have you second guessing what your true capability is. And so when you think about that, you have to unlock your silence and be ready to kind of get snatched and leveled up to that next point of your career. And so when you do that, you take total control, total responsibility of recognizing what it is that you can change and what it is that you could be the new author of in your next chapter of your book. Because as leaders, we don't necessarily always have a prescription of wellness, but the prescription of wellness comes from recognizing that you need a prescription of some sort and identifying who is going to be the best person, the best team, the best strategist, the best whatever that's going to help you see through. Because remember, whatever change and shift 2 millimeter things that you are trying to do, it always seems impossible until it's done. And it's not going to be an easy job. And pulling that curtain back and having a daily divorce of self conversation with yourself when you have to constantly go into the workspace and you're already anticipating with anxiety and angst what is going to be said about you today. And so, if this is a work situation that you are encountering, this would be an area that, like I said, this is my jam. This whole work trauma stress place situation, this is my jam. This is where, we really can roll up the sleeves and help you be able to position yourself in the most powerful way, to have that discipline to identify what these distractions are that you are engaged in, so that the impossible can become possible and you can next level your career in the way that you see the strongest fit. Because as a highest achiever, you're always striving to do more. And if you feel as if you are snatched and handcuffed and unable to do more, then that would be the best opportunity for you to consider how your leadership can break that glass ceiling. Because remember, glass ceilings don't really exist. A glass ceiling is your mindset around your capability to moving forward. So if you would like to learn more about what your blind spots are, or how does these things manifest, and how you could change it from being stressed to a pleasant work situation, or from trauma to being a post trauma, because not only have you healed, but you've positioned yourself with strategy that we will recognize it before it manifests in the next conversation and the next interview and the next space, such that you have the discipline to know what it is that you can do better. And so I'm encouraging you to not be a hidden figure and to realize that your gifts are in the making. And that, remember, anybody who is being overlooked, underpaid, and passed over for a promotion, or passed over for, whatever it is that you are striving for in your leveling up of your career, you have the capacity to do that and then some. And I look forward to possibly having the opportunity for talking with you through how this journey could be yours. So if there's any questions, any final thoughts, any things that you would like to highlight or for me to revisit, please feel free to drop those in the chat right now. One of the comments on Instagram was like, not personalizing it. That is definitely the key. And absolutely, not personalizing it is pretty much the key. It's the key to success, and recognizing that because when we personalize, we internalize. When we internalize, that's when the interpersonal fracture of how it is that we succeed on a day-to-day basis, or the fact that we don't succeed on a day-to-day basis, like, comes into play. So you have to be able to change the script, look at how the goals have been in place before, and be able to position yourself differently so that you can succeed in the roadmap, using the GPS, footprints, and everything. And why do it from a dwelling standpoint, where you're like, okay, I'm going to look at this and I'm going to be able to like implement this. Fast forward your growth with someone who's already done what you're doing and has worked with people over 10, 15 years to be able to do the same thing that you desire. So expedite your level up by just, sitting down, grab your calendar, go to the calendar and see what my availability is, and let's chat. Let's chat. Let's get you to that level up positioning that you seek and desire. And so at this time, just like last week, we went over a little bit. I'm assuming that there's no other questions and no other thoughts. I do know that there's usually a delay, but I do thank you for joining me live on this Tuesday morning cup of coffee or tea or smoothie with your leadership nuggets and Mary May. I am here each and every Tuesday morning, generally 7:30, generally for like 20 to 30 minutes, to share some nuggets with you on how it is that you can level up and how it is that you can kind of identify the ways that you have roadblocks and detours in your mindset and your productivity that's keeping you in a position of being overlooked and underpaid. So I look forward to any comments. If you catch me on the replay, do hashtag replay and whatever your comments are, and I'll be sure to come back and share some love with you as well. In the meanwhile, I look forward to seeing you next week as well as other times throughout these internet streets. So you stay well and you stay safe. And until then, talk to you soon. All right, take care.